Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom, and we're back after the 1 week break. We're back at the Apex to break down UFC Vegas 107. It's not a massive card in regards to firepower from like a name value perspective, but again, these cards deliver. I think there's some really good fights from a betting perspective. I think there's some good spots as well, but also from a betting perspective, and this is always key, but I think that with this card, it might be more key than previous recent cards, is it's very important to understand which fights to potentially stay away from. Again, the betting line is everything, the odds are everything, and I think there's some fights here that, I like the winner, but the line's just sailed a little bit too far. So definitely from a betting perspective, it's super important, this card, and I'm looking forward to getting into it and breaking down all the 11 fights for you. Now, just before we get into those breakdowns, as always, if you want to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMA Play 365. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a gambler that likes the long-term game, you want to read the written breakdowns and find out why we're recommending the bets that we are recommending from the handicapper, whether you're somebody that likes the fun parlays, whether you want the parlays to be built for you, whether you want to build your own parlays and make something massive, we've got that section for you as well. And of course, we've got the official bet section, which is the bets that the handicapper's money is going to, which is myself. If you don't want to read any breakdowns, you don't want to build parlays, you just want to tail a handicapper, then that section's for you as well. And then, of course, all of our betting subscriptions come with Base AI, our UFC prediction software, which is on an absolute heater at the minute. I had a great event before that 1 week break that we had last weekend. And again, we do not separate Base AI from the professional handicapper. Everything is included in one subscription. It's all super affordable as well, as our ethos is we want you to make the money back that you spend with us as quickly as you possibly can so you can start profiting on top of your bets. Again, if you want to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you hit up MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promo out the way, let's get straight into breaking down the fights. And of course, as always, we start in the main event. We've got 5 rounds in the women's flyweight division between Erin Blanchfield and Maycee Barber. Now, this is an interesting fight from a prospect perspective because both of these fighters came into the UFC with a massive amount of hype on them. Definitely more on Maycee Barber's side. Barber, the hype was there, seemed to calm down a little bit, and then it grew a little bit, and it's kind of probably plateaued a little bit. I think now, at least from my perspective, it's just a case of, look, I know Barber's a good fighter. Is she a future champion? I'm not sure. It's these types of fights that are going to determine if she is a future champion or not. I know there's a lot of controversy on some of Barber's wins as well. The wins by decision. She's won a few where, again, the majority think that the fight should have gone the other way, but it's been given to Barber. So that's got to be a concern for anybody fighting Barber. However, those fights were over 3 rounds where, again, in a 3-round fight where some of the rounds, maybe one of the rounds are close and, maybe a couple of the rounds are close. Over 3 rounds, it's easier to get a decision wrong, I think, over 3 rounds than it is over 5 rounds. But again, with that being said, if there's 5 close rounds here, then we might end up in another controversial spot. But I just feel that over 5 rounds in this type of fight, it's much easier for the fighter that is the better fighter to, sort of pull away down the stretch if the fight goes that long, which this could possibly do. Now, with Erin Blanchfield's a fighter that I've been super high on since she came into the UFC. She's got legitimate grappling skills. The wrestling, I think, needs to definitely catch up. And I kind of think, it's a bit of a conveyor belt in regards to, how Blanchfield does need to improve and develop a game. And we've got to understand that she's still super young. She's still got so many years before she even hits her prime. And those developments will be made. It's just she's absolutely outstanding right now. She's world class right now. So even at this young age, she's competing at a high level. And we've got to judge her and sort of critique and analyse her skill set and her as a fighter based on the level that she's currently at, which again is that high level. And I think the conveyor belt that I spoke about is, look, the jiu-jitsu is absolutely where, in my opinion, she's potentially light years ahead of everybody else in the division, but the wrestling has got to catch up to that level of grappling, because if fighters want to keep it standing with Blanchfield and have got a good level of defensive wrestling and can keep the fight upright, then Blanchfield's not going to get the fight into the place and into the world where she wants it, which is on the mat. And then you go a step further back than that, the striking. The striking is something that Blanchfield has definitely improved. She's putting up good numbers, good volume. But again, I just feel that striking can go to a next level, which helps her close the distance, which then will help her shoot a takedown or get into the clinch and look for, a trip, a hip toss, a throw. And then that gets the fight to where she needs it to be. And this is actually the only concern I've got for Blanchfield here, because we saw when Blanchfield fought Fiorot, like Fiorot super physical, super imposing. And in my opinion, Fiorot is a level above Barber. If Fiorot and Barber fought, I think Fiorot absolutely tortures her. But with that being said, where Blanchfield was a little bit stuck against Fiorot was from the physicality perspective, actually being able to muscle her way into a clinch and be able to put her down on the ground, because as much as you can use technique, physicality does play a part in getting fights down to the mat when you're looking to wrestle and, work inside the clinch. And Barber is very thick for the division. She's a strong and physical fighter herself. So I do have that slight concern for Blanchfield of, if she does tie up with Barber, is she going to have the strength and the physicality to be able to get her down to the mat? But again, I don't think Barber is at the level of Fiorot with that strength and with the strength and the power. So I do think that Blanchfield will be able to get this fight down. I just don't think it's going to be as easy as it has been in other fights against lesser physical fighters, if that makes sense. But from a skill set perspective, I think that Barber's going to be more dangerous, more efficient on the feet in regards to, pushing the action and landing power shots. I think Blanchfield could potentially out-volume Barber though. But again, it's how the judges would see that. Would they see, the volume of Blanchfield, or would they see the aggression and the power shots of Barber? I kind of think it'd be the latter. But what Barber will do is, when she's coming forwards and being super aggressive, I think she's going to leave openings for Blanchfield to tie up with her or shoot a takedown and get her down to the mat. And look, Barber's no slouch on the mat either, but with Blanchfield on top of anybody in this division, I think Blanchfield, does a phenomenal job as long as she can get them settled. That was the issue with Fiorot. Blanchfield never got Fiorot settled. She got her down a couple of times, but, the times where the fight did hit the mat, Fiorot was already mid-scramble before her back actually hit the mat. So she never actually got fully shoulder to shoulder, flat on her back and allowed Blanchfield to do some work. Whereas I think she can get that out of Barber this fight. So this is why, look, I think that Blanchfield's a better mixed martial artist right now. I think she's more skilled. I think that she's going to win the fight. In regards to the betting line, look, I bet Blanchfield quite a lot of times. I've won most of them. I've lost a couple of them. But in regards to, like I said in the introduction, getting the right betting line, I kind of feel like the line sailed a little bit too much here. Like Blanchfield up at like minus 240, minus 250, minus 260, and I anticipate that to grow to about minus 300. Could be wrong about that, but that's just my thoughts and my gut feeling of where the line's going to move to. But I kind of feel that's just out of value. I think there's value on Blanchfield probably around minus 200, but then on the flip side, I don't think that value that you lose on Blanchfield at minus 250 flips over into value on Barber either. So I think it's one of those fights where I'm just happy to watch it play out, unless the money does come back in on Barber. Blanchfield, that line shortens up a little bit. But yeah, look, I think Erin Blanchfield's the better fighter. I think the line's slightly out of value, probably closer to where the true odds should be on her. So yeah, look, from a betting perspective, it's probably not going to be one for me. Like I say, unless the line shortens up. But from a straight pick and prediction perspective, I'm picking Erin Blanchfield to win this fight. And in the next fight in the co-main event, this is an interesting fight, and I kind of feel like this one is going to be completely and utterly split on places like MMA X, formerly Twitter, of course. Twitter X isn't a place that I normally spend a lot of time nowadays. I'm way past the MMA X. Those days are long gone of me, sitting on my phone and debating fights with people. But I would imagine that this fight is going to be split, and there's going to be a lot of people being quite bullish on either side. And the introduction to the fight, we've got Mateusz Gamrot versus Ludovic Klein. And I think the reason why a lot of people are going to be split on this is because you've got a clear distinguished style versus style type of fight. You've got Gamrot that wins via wrestling and grappling, and you've got Ludovic Klein that wins via striking. Gamrot will lose a striking fight, and Ludovic Klein, if he can't keep the fight upright, is going to lose this fight as well. But I kind of think from like a betting perspective, like the Dan Hooker loss last time out for Gamrot, it wasn't like the name Dan Hooker, that's not a bad loss at all, but the way the fight played out, I think that's the reason why Gamrot's probably not up at around minus 250, maybe even higher in this spot, because Dan Hooker, the blueprint was already laid out of how he beat Gamrot anyway, but that actually played out perfectly for Dan Hooker last time out. And you look at how Hooker fought and you think, well, Klein will have absolutely watched that fight and just will be thinking, I need to replicate absolutely everything that Dan Hooker did. And if I do that, I'm going to win the fight. Because although Gamrot got takedowns against Hooker, he was getting torched on the feet, which I think Ludovic Klein will do good work on the feet against Gamrot. And every time Gamrot shot in for a takedown, if he completed a takedown, I think he hit 5 of them, Hooker would get right back up to his feet. He wouldn't settle on his back. And Hooker was also doing a good job of initially defending takedowns as well. So the fight played out literally exactly how a fight should play out if you're going to beat Mateusz Gamrot. Now, the thing is with Ludovic Klein, the questions that I've got is, does Klein have that level of wrestling defense and grappling defense from a relentless wrestler as as Dan Hooker? Because, he's got to have that level. Now, Dan Hooker is a fighter that's been at the top of the division for years. He's got that defensive skill set. And although Klein does defend 91% of takedowns, statistically, like you look at all of his opponents in the UFC, you can't point to a single one of them where you'd say he's a wrestler. Like, he's fought some grapplers like a Thiago Moises, by the way, which we'll talk about, very shortly. But he's fought a couple of predominant grapplers, but for the most part they've been either strikers or fighters that have got that all-round style that are okay everywhere but not really a specialist in one specific area. So what I'm trying to get at here is I don't think Klein has been tested by a relentless wrestler, and definitely not a fighter at the level of Gamrot, who has got a win against an Arman Sarukian. Yeah, it was, some people will call it controversial. I cashed Gamrot as a 3-1 underdog, a plus 300 underdog in that fight. So, even if that fight was controversial and was super close, like, I was on the right side. And obviously I was on the right side and it cashed as well, which again is one of the reasons why you always want to be on the underdog in these super close fights. But like I say, Gamrot is wrestling and grappling at that level with a Sarukian, whereas Klein, I just don't think he's seen that level of wrestler and grappler. But that doesn't mean that he can't replicate that game plan of Hooker. And this is where I think, like I said initially, there's going to be a big split in opinions here, because there will be some people that will think, well, yeah, Klein, Klein's been looking great lately. He's going to be able to stuff the takedowns and keep the fight on the feet and torch Gamrot and win that way. Like, the blueprint is out there for a Gamrot win and a Gamrot loss. So, like I say, I can understand to an extent why there'd be a split. But for me, like, the resurgence that people talk about Ludovic Klein being on, like, yeah, he's on a 4-fight win streak, but there's question marks on some of those. Like the Brahimaj fight, that, by the way, that's the win that is super impressive. However, I feel that if those two were rematching on this card, I wouldn't be confident in Klein being the favourite in that fight. In fact, I think Brahimaj would be the favourite, which speaks volume considering Klein's already beaten him. So what I'm getting at that is I think if they rematched, I think Brahimaj wins. And that's not to take away anything from Klein. He just had the good performance on the night. Brahimaj had the off night. I think that's what it was. But then you look at the other wins, you've got AJ Cunningham, you've got Roosevelt Roberts, which aren't on the level of either of Gamrot or Klein. And then you've got Thiago Moises, which I thought was a great win until last weekend. And, I was wrong about Moises. I bet Moises as a plus money underdog last weekend, and he got flattened in round 1 by Jared Gordon, who isn't typically known for his, one-punch KO power. He's more of a decision type of fighter, and he's an aging fighter as well. So I'm kind of thinking, well, maybe Moises isn't the goods that I thought he could potentially be. So then now you're looking at that Klein win against Moises and, it's not aged that well. And then you look at Gamrot. Yeah, Gamrot took a split decision loss on his UFC debut nearly 6 years ago in a fight that, again, probably should have won. And even Kuta Taladze said on the mic post-fight interview inside the cage that he thought Gamrot should have won. And then Gamrot's only other loss is Beneil, apart from the Dan Hooker, which we've spoke about, is the Beneil Dariush fight. And Dariush is just a nightmare stylistic opponent for someone like Gamrot because he can wrestle defensively and he's a high-level grappler as well. So, again, like, looking at this fight, I'm kind of just leaning on this could potentially be a levels type of fight where Gamrot is just a level above Klein. Klein deserves to step up in competition. He's on a 4-fight win streak, which is never easy in the UFC, and now he's got a Gamrot. But I just think Gamrot's going to be well prepared here, well trained at American Top Team, good training partners to, sort of emulate Klein. And I just feel that, again, it's a potential levels type of fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Mateusz Gamrot to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ramiz Brahimaj versus Billy Goff. Now, this is a fight that's been sort of patched together. Both fighters were always on this card, so it's not really a short notice fight for either fighter, but both of their opponents pulled out for one reason or another, so the UFC have matched them together. So it's a new fight, but I wouldn't say it's a short notice fight. They've both been in camp, and yeah, look, I'm always glad to see when two fighters lose an opponent from the same weight class that the UFC just do the right thing and match them up together. How the fight actually plays out, I'm going to be super intrigued actually to how it plays out, because like Brahimaj was a fighter that, again, look, I'll always big up when I'm right. I was right about Magomed Ankalaev years ago. I was right about Islam Makhachev. I was right about Khamzat Chimaev. I was right about Alexander Rakic. I've been right about a lot of fighters, but I've also been wrong about a lot of fighters as well. And Ramiz Brahimaj is definitely one of those fighters. I thought that he was going to have a super high ceiling. I'd never have called him a future champion, but I definitely thought that he was going to be a problem fighter for opponents, and it's just not quite worked out that way. Like, he's predominantly a grappler, but again, the wrestling doesn't really, hasn't really like sort of worked for the grappling, and then the striking is very hit and miss as well. But from a grappling perspective, when he can get on top of opponents, that's where he is good. But it's at what level is he that good in regards to level of UFC opponents? And then, how often is he even going to get there because of the wrestling side? I think for Brahimaj to really dominate opponents, I think he's got to be fighting sort of the lower end of the division. And I'm not being disrespectful there. I just feel that that's where Brahimaj's level is in the UFC. I do think he's a UFC level fighter because he's got wins in the UFC. And any fighter that does have wins in the UFC and has performed well in the UFC is clearly, clearly a UFC level fighter. Now, Billy Goff, on the other hand, I just think he's going to be a nightmare for Brahimaj, if I'm being honest. And two reasons why. The first one, Goff's got decent wrestling, got wrestling background. So is Brahimaj going to be able to get the takedowns here? I just don't. I mean, you can never say never when it comes. You can never say, a fighter's not going to get a takedown, because all it takes is one good entry, one opponent to overexert on a strike and leave the opening to level change and shoot in. But, from technically speaking, Goff's the better wrestler, so Brahimaj's going to have difficulties getting him down to the mat. And even if Brahimaj does get Goff down, Goff is like a live wire inside the cage. I think he'll just spring straight into a scramble and be able to get back up. And then on the feet, Goff has got this crazy, relentless forward pressure, which, is great to watch, but it can also leave some holes defensively. Like, Goff can be defensively vulnerable. Maybe Brahimaj can land a punch as Goff's coming forward and leaves an opening. And again, we all know that even a jab can borderline knock a fighter out when the opponent's, piling on some heavy forward pressure and the jab hits the face as the fighter's coming forward. The force of it it just excels. So, maybe Brahimaj can catch Goff coming forwards recklessly, but, typically speaking, when Brahimaj does have pressure put on him, he can sort of get on the back foot a little bit more than what you'd like. And I'm not going to say he quits or folds, but, he doesn't like that overwhelming pressure. And that's exactly what Billy Goff's going to deliver it. And Goff hits hard as well. So I kind of think that, Goff is liable to get chin checked here on his way in, coming forwards, being super aggressive and reckless. But again, I just think that there's more to this fight than Goff just coming forwards and just getting hit with a clean counter. I think that Brahimaj is going to get got at from an overwhelming pressure perspective. I think he's going to get landed on. I think Goff could even take Brahimaj down and be okay with Brahimaj on his back. Brahimaj looks like a dangerous grappler, but a grappler that will certainly benefit from a top position rather than a bottom position. So, yeah, look, Goff's I think he's like a minus 340 favourite last time I saw it. I'm not sure I'm not sure you can really justify Goff being a minus 340 favourite, but it certainly backs up the thoughts that I've got with Brahimaj here in the stylistic matchup. So for those reasons, I'm picking Billy Goff to win this fight. And in the next fight, you've got Dustin Jacoby versus Bruno Lopes. Now, Bruno Lopes, the underdog here, I really tried to get behind him, actually. And when I first saw the line, listen, this is nothing against Dustin Jacoby. Like, listening to my previous Jacoby breakdowns, he's a fighter that I've always been quite high on. The striking skill set's really good. Wrestling and grappling offensively has never really been there, but that's not really his game. However, defensively, he's understood he needed to work on that to elevate his striking and to elevate striking game plans, and he's done that. Very difficult to take down. If you do take him down, he can get right back up to his feet. He does show his back, so unless he's fighting somebody that's like a seriously high-level back taker, then he's probably going to be all right, just showing his back for a couple of seconds while he stands back up and then starts breaking the body lock. But I really tried to get behind Bruno Lopes here, but I just can't. Yes, he hit a lot of takedowns last time out, but you look at the takedowns that he was shooting, and I just kind of think that Dustin Jacoby is going to be able to deal with them. They weren't like high-level takedowns with really good entries where, the opponent didn't stand a chance of defending them. There were takedowns that were sort of shot, I wouldn't say half-hearted, but they were just shot for the purpose of pushing the opponents back to the cage and then working the takedown against the cage, chain wrestling against the cage to try and get the fight down to the mat. But I think Jacoby he's physical as well, but he does a really good job of digging underhooks and breaking body locks and, getting his base nice and low so his opponent doesn't take him down. And Bruno Lopes isn't one of these predominant wrestlers. He's just a fighter that just seems to have, a good takedown game. But I just don't think, again, you can never say never, but I just don't think it's going to be a game plan against Jacoby that's going to be that effective, is what I'm trying to say. So he might get a couple of takedowns, but I don't think the fight's going to be won and lost based on wrestling and grappling. And that's due to Jacoby's defensive game from a wrestling and grappling perspective. So with the fight playing out on the feet, Bruno Lopes can swing, he can be dangerous, but man, I just think Dustin Jacoby's just levels above here with the striking. I think he hits harder. I think his reaction's good. I think his defense is better. I think his offense is certainly better. He's quicker, slicker. I just feel that on the feet, Jacoby's actually going to have a really good time in this fight and just look really good. He's got to mind his P's and Q's that he don't get hit with a bomb from Lopes, because that can happen. And we have seen Jacoby hurt and knocked out before. But again, when you're looking at the fight, especially the speed, I think the speed is going to be a massive factor in this fight. And with Jacoby basically having the ability to decide when he comes into range, when he comes out of range, dictating the pace and the range of the fight, I just think he's going to have a good time on the feet, defend any takedowns that might come at him, and then just light Bruno Lopes up on the feet, potentially get a knockout. If he doesn't get a knockout, then just rack up a good amount of volume against him. So for those reasons, I'm picking Dustin Jacoby to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ketlen Vieira versus Maycee Chiasson. Now, this is an interesting fight because I kind of think that Vieira, from a skill set perspective, is the more skilled fighter here. She's a Brazilian wrestling champion. She's got judo background. She's got a Brazilian jiu-jitsu background. So she's got I wouldn't say she's a specialist in those areas, but she's definitely predominantly good in those three areas from a technical standpoint. Whereas you look at Maycee Chiasson, and I don't think Chiasson's a specialist anywhere. I think she's got a good, well-rounded style, and she's very serviceable. But I am leaning towards the side of Chiasson here, and I tell you why. Ketlen Vieira 10 years ago, or nearly 10 years ago, 9-10 years ago, was very promising, potentially a fighter that's going to be up there challenging for titles, maybe winning a title. She had all the skill set. She was young. She was super effective in what she was doing. She was beating fighters at the time where, the fighters, that fight she was supposed to maybe not win or struggle or lose, and she was coming out on top and doing it really well. But over the years, she's just been quite stop-start, and every time she's been on a little bit of a streak, she's lost, and then that's reset her, and then she's had to go again. She's put another 2 or 3 wins together, and then lost again. And I just feel that the time for Vieira has probably just passed her a little bit in regards to getting to that top of the division. And actually, she's got 8 wins in the UFC. And if you look at how many of those fighters are still in the UFC, there's only 2 of them. And one of them is Miesha Tate, who's retired once before and probably on the verge of retiring again. And then the only other fighter, out of that, well, that's one of the 2. The other fighter that's still in the UFC is Pannie Kianzad. So it's a bit like, she's had some good wins over the years, but what is she like right now? And right now, I just think that she's still got that skill set, but I just don't know how effective she can be with that skill set of, the wrestling, the judo and the jiu-jitsu, because I just feel that the other fighters that are fresher, like Macy Chiasson's not super young, but she's definitely fresher in regards to miles on the clock. And I just think these other fresher and younger fighters are just catching Vieira up a little bit. And I've got question marks over Vieira's ability to fight through adversity. She can crumble a little bit at times. I've got question marks over the durability. I've got question marks over the cardio as well when she's in a tough fight and not having things her way. And I think that's really key here because, again, I feel like Vieira is very much a front runner. When she's the one on top in fights, then she looks phenomenal. When she's facing a little bit of adversity and she's on the back foot a little bit, I think she can go completely the opposite way and 180. And this is what's key with Chiasson, because Chiasson's greatest traits, in my opinion, are the physicality, the strength, the forward pressure, the ability to overwhelm opponents. And those are all things that Vieira struggled against. And then the other thing that Vieira struggled against, it's how she lost rounds against Holly Holm. It's pretty much how she lost the entire fight against Raquel Pennington. And that is the physicality and having a back pushed against the cage wall with opponents using a clinch-heavy game plan. And Chiasson is very good in the clinch-heavy game plan world. So, I feel that although Vieira's the more skilled martial artist, I think Chiasson's the better MMA fighter. I think that and then when you look at on the feet, like even at range, Chiasson's big, she's tall, she's long. The strength's actually quite deceptive because you normally get the strength from the shorter, stockier fighters, but Chiasson's got strength with a good lengthy frame as well. And a striking, I think, is better than Vieira's. Striking out at range, coming into range with the clinch, I think from a striking perspective, or stand-up perspective, Chiasson's going to be better at more ranges. And even if Vieira does get Chiasson down, I'm just not convinced she's going to be able to roll all over. Like, Chiasson's got a decent, MMA grappling game. Yeah, in a straight jiu-jitsu, matchup, Vieira will run through Chiasson, but again, it's not jiu-jitsu, it's MMA, and I think, using scrambles, using the cage wall to try and get back up to your feet, I just don't think that Vieira will dominate in the area that she needs to in order to win this fight. So it just leads me on the side of Chiasson here. For those reasons, I'm picking Maycee Chiasson to win this fight. And in the next fight, this can't be anything but absolute, pure 100% entertainment. We've got Zach Reese versus Dusko Todorovic. And the reason why I say that this fight should just be unbelievably fun to watch is you've got 2 fighters that, again, talking of front runners, both of these fighters are super front runners, super aggressive, super dangerous, will come forwards, will leave it all in the cage from an offensive perspective, but are quite reckless and they don't have too much concern for, the defensive aspect of the game. They can be got out, they can be vulnerable on the feet, they can leave holes when they're attacking and being super aggressive, super overwhelming and super offensive. And it's one of these fights where you can absolutely see one of these fighters getting knocked out from like a crazy exchange. Now, from a straight punch power perspective, I think Dusko Todorovic is probably got the harder punch, but man, when Zach Reese touches you, Zach Reese will hurt you. But the thing is with Todorovic, he's predominantly got power from the punches, whereas Reese can knock you out with a punch, he can knock you out with an elbow, a knee, a kick, and again, I kind of feel it's one of these fights that when you're analysing it and you're looking at, okay, well, which fighter is the more likely one to go down? Because, again, both it's going to be a super aggressive fight with a lot of reckless exchanges. So I kind of feel it's one of those fights where the durability is going to play a massive factor in this fight. Now, even though they can both get knocked out, I trust the durability of Zach Reese way more than Dusko Todorovic at this point. I think that Todorovic, he's always been known anyway since he came into the UFC for having his hands down, for when an opponent is coming forwards and striking, he'll lean back, he'll put his hands down and lean back and leave his chin in the air, which is a knockout waiting to happen. And when he first came to the UFC, it was just a matter of time before he did get knocked out, and eventually he was getting dropped, rocked, knocked out. I think he's took a lot of damage in the process, whereas look, Zach Reese got hurt badly in his last fight, but again, I think Todorovic has took more damage. I think the durability is more of a concern than Reese. But again, on the flip side, I'm not going to be shocked to see Todorovic knock Reese out. I just feel that it's a fight where you have to put the analysis and the trust in which fighter's more likely to be durable, therefore less likely to get knocked out. And I think that fighter's Zach Reese. So for those reasons, I'm picking Zach Reese to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Allan Nascimento versus Jafel Filho. Now, I'll always be honest, I'll always be transparent. I've been very back and forth on this fight to the point where, I'm having to go to my roots and make the final pick based on the betting line, which, again, I'll talk about very shortly. And I think that the reason I've been back and forth is both of these fighters are really good grapplers, and they can both wrestle, but both aren't the wrestling of both fighters aren't at the level of the grappling. So again, the wrestling might be a little bit messy here, and I'll tell you again, another reason why I'm back and forth is I think Nascimento's the better wrestler. I think he will be able to get Filho down. It's just I think Filho is going to be a little bit cleaner technically, and I also think that Filho is going to be more physical as well, which might make Allan Nascimento, work a little bit harder for these takedowns. But with Filho on his back, I do worry a little bit about Filho playing guard. But then when you take the analysis a little bit further, I don't think Nascimento is going to play in Filho's guard. I don't think he's going to sit in Filho's guard and just allow Filho to, throw up the submissions and, run the clock down whilst Nascimento's winning. Nascimento, his bread and butter is within the grappling as well. So I think once the fight's on the mat, I think Nascimento will be trying to pass, guard, transition to certain positions, looking for potential submissions. He's very much a live wire on the mat and will always hunt for the back as well. But this is where I think Jafel will benefit. Because if Allan Nascimento was a fighter that will just sit in guard, I think he could just run the clock down and win 3 straight rounds quite comfortably and keep Filho down and just allow Filho to be throwing up these arm bars and triangles that, Nascimento can defend all day long. But if there's transitions, if there's quick movement on the mat, going from position to position, it's not going to allow Filho to settle on his back, which is a good thing for Filho. And I think when Nascimento's moving from position to position, Filho will be able to find gaps and holes to be able to escape out to, and that will allow him to not get controlled on the mat. And then when you're looking at the striking, the striking of both fighters is probably even as well. And this is why it's so close. I think the wrestling's quite even. I think the striking's even. I think the grappling's somewhat even as well. The only position that I don't think Filho will be able to get too much time in is on top of Nascimento. I think Nascimento will do a good job of defending takedowns and not being able to get taken down. But I actually think it's on the feet that Filho might be able to get at Nascimento. If Nascimento's working super hard trying to get these takedowns against a more physical fighter, and then positioning hard, transitioning from position to position super fast, I think maybe expending some cardio, and then Filho getting back up to his feet, that's going to, sort of drain the cardio a little bit of Nascimento as well. I'm so back and forth, because on the flip side, I could see Nascimento just getting 6 or 7 takedowns in this fight with, a couple of minutes of control each round and winning comfortably as well. I'm just super torn. The problem that I've got here is I don't know which fighter is the better raw grappler That's the issue that I'm having here. If I was confident that one of these fighters was the better raw grappler, then that would be the fighter that I'd be super confident in winning this fight. But I'm just not sure, because Filho is a very, very tricky grappler. Like, I don't think people give him enough credit. Like, credit has got to be, it's got to be given to Filho when it comes to the grappling, because he is very good there. So because I'm unsure of who's the better grappler, I'm not that confident of who wins the fight. So then I'm talking about coming back to my roots and where I'm going to lay my pick and prediction. Well, in a fight that I'm going back and forth on, that I'm not super confident in, and I'm a little bit unsure of, that could be super close and competitive, I'm just going to side with the underdog, which in this case is Jafel Filho. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jafel Filho to win this fight. And in the next fight, another fight that I'm actually not sure on. Again, there's only a couple of these, so don't worry, I'm not going to sit on the fence for a lot of them. But we've got Jordan Leavitt versus Kurt Holobaugh. Now, Jordan Leavitt, definitely fresher, definitely less miles on the clock. Kurt Holobaugh's a veteran, been in the UFC a couple of times, which again not doesn't happen too many times to fighters, but he's a fighter that is a veteran, that's got a ton of experience, that is gritty, that is grindy, dirty, ugly, durable, won't go anywhere, will be a challenge for everybody at this level in the UFC. And that's key when I talk about the levels, because I think Jordan Leavitt is a skilled fighter, especially when it comes to the grappling. But as an MMA fighter, he's at this level. He's at the level of fighters that Kurt Holobaugh can put veteran performances against. So again, like, when it comes to Leavitt, if he's definitely the better grappler in a fight, then yeah, he's gonna have a massive advantage in one aspect of a mixed martial arts fight. But the thing is with Kurt Holobaugh, as much as you see this dirty, ugly, grinding fighter that can actually bang as well on the feet, his bread and butter is within his grappling. He's a very good grappler. Now, I don't think Leavitt's going to shoot a takedown and leave his neck so exposed that he gets guillotined, but I do think that Holobaugh can handle himself on the mat, especially defensively, which is where Jordan Leavitt is going to be best. Now, if this is a fight where Jordan Leavitt takes Holobaugh down and you can't really, he feels that Holobaugh is a good grappler and can't really get too many beneficial, good positions on the mat, I think Leavitt probably would just sit in Holobaugh's guard and just, body, head, and just look for submission, just doing enough to keep the referee away. Like, that could potentially nullify Holobaugh. So that's Leavitt's side. But on the flip side, I think Holobagh's going to be the better striker. And not by a million miles, but I do think he's going to be more effective. He hits harder than Leavitt, so I think the knockout upside is on Holobaugh's side. And again, if Holobaugh takes Leavitt down, I don't anticipate him having too much top control time. I think for Holobaugh to win this fight, he will win it by standing and striking rather than the grappling, because I think straight grappling, Leavitt will be better than Holobaugh. But the reason why I'm so torn here is because I know that Holobaugh's grappling is decent, and is it decent to sort of not nullify Leavitt, but to keep himself safe from bad positions on the mat against Leavitt and stand back up against Leavitt? It might be, and it's one of those where, just like I've said with Allan Nascimento and Jafel Filho, I'm just not sure if with Nascimento and Filho, I just didn't know which one's the better grappler. Leavitt's the better grappler. The bit that I'm unsure about is Holobaugh's grappling good enough to be able to defensively, not get in any trouble from the grappling perspective. And that's the bit that I'm unsure about, because if his grappling is good enough for that, then I think Holobaugh wins the fight. If it's not, then he loses comfortably. So again, it's one of these fights I've been back and forth on, super unsure. And again, just like I said with the last fight, in a fight that I'm super unsure on, that I think could potentially be close, that could play out, in many different ways with either fighter winning, I'm just going to side with the underdog. In this case, it's Holobaugh. For those reasons, I'm picking Kurt Holobaugh to win this fight. And in the next fight, I hope we finally get the UFC debut of Andreas Gustafsson versus Trevin Giles. Now, Gustafsson was a fighter I was so stoked to make his UFC debut. It was supposed to be, I think it was earlier this year or late last year. And yeah, the fight didn't go through. The fight was cancelled, and we didn't get Andreas Gustafsson on that card. But he's a fighter that, even at 34 years of age, man, I'm so excited to see him inside the UFC. Like, depending on how you watch his fights, like if you watch him in chronological order or not, like I watched his Contender Series fight first, clinch heavy approach, for a guy that's seemingly packing a lot of power and a lot of strength, rather than, trying to floor his opponent with a big punch. He was very clinch heavy, used his strength and physicality against the cage, clinch work, opponents back against the cage wall type of job. So I was thinking, okay, well, he's efficient, not super entertaining, but he's definitely efficient, which when it comes from a betting perspective, I don't care if my fight is entertaining or not. I want them efficient, I want them winning minutes, I want them winning rounds, and I want them to give themselves the best chance of winning, even if it's a snooze fest, because it's never a snooze fest when your fighter that you've got money on is the one dominating in what would typically be deemed as a boring manner. So yeah, look, at that point I was like, okay, serviceable. But the fight that really got me was the Tony Lampinen fight, which is on UFC Fight Pass. I'm assuming everybody listening to this has got UFC Fight Pass. So go on to UFC Fight Pass and watch that Andreas Gustafsson and Tony Lampinen fight. That fight is one of the best fights that I've ever seen. Probably, I don't know whether I'd go top 5, although it's debatable, but certainly top 10 best fights I've ever seen. Full of blood. Both fighters getting rocked, dropped, hit. Like I say, blood everywhere. A finish as well, but it wasn't one of those that it was just super electric from the start and then the fight ended early. It was a brawl for a long time and then there was a finish, which is the perfect type of fight. And it's that fight that I was like, holy shit, Andreas Gustafsson, yeah, he can be got at, which is important as well, because you need to know that a fighter can be got at, when it comes to breaking down fighters and potentially betting them. But what it showed me is that Gustafsson can be hurt, fight through durability, fight through a bloody messed up face and still get a win and still get, a big win and a highlight reel win as well. And like I say, from that moment, I was sold on Andreas Gustafsson. And also another fight as well that was very interesting. I still can't find this. I said this the last time I broke a Gustafsson fight down. I still can't find the Gustafsson and Damian Janikowski fight anywhere on the internet. It was at KSW. It was a kind of behind closed doors type of fight. I think it was just when COVID was finishing and things hadn't really picked back up yet. And it was a behind closed doors type of fight at KSW, which do have their own pay-per-views, and I think they might have their own library on the site, so it's very difficult to find the fight. But I was actually there in person, because I was there for Scott Askham, who was the main event against Mamed Khalidov. So I was actually there and saw that fight against Damian Janikowski. Now, Andreas Gustafsson had Janikowski in front of him, who is a big, brute Polish MMA hero. The Polish absolutely love him, and I can understand why. He's a silver medalist in Greco-Roman wrestling. He's a fighter that will come forward with power, that will empty his cardio to give the fans a good show. But more importantly, he's that silver medalist in Greco-Roman wrestling. Greco-Roman being the key word there, it's more upper body wrestling rather than your freestyle, which is, can you shoot your single legs and your double legs. Your Greco-Roman's upper body takedown. So that, again, is... The fight was close. I do think that Gustafsson lost the fight, but the fight was super close. It could have gone either way. And just the fact that he competed at that level against Damian Janikowski, who I also think would do well in the UFC as well, does tell me that Gustafsson, from a technical perspective, is ready. Yes, he can be this brute force, animal on the feet, landing hard punches, swinging, exchanging, knocking his opponents out. Yes, he can be dominant in the clinch as well. But what's he like in regards to the wrestling and grappling? Does he have holes there? Well, he was taken down by Janikowski, but he didn't get controlled for too long. He also didn't get taken down on every takedown attempt either. So I know he's got the skill set to be a very good UFC fighter. Now, on the flip side, I've spent a lot of time on Gustafsson right now. I just wanted to get the points out there that of why I'm so excited to see him. On the flip side, he's got Trevin Giles. Now, Trevin Giles is a serviceable fighter. He's a fighter that I've never been overly high on personally. I bet against him more often than not. And he's a fighter that I think it comes with a lot of unforced errors, which is unfortunate. But with that being said, he has got a good skill set as well. You can't take that away from him. He's definitely a UFC caliber fighter. He's got okay striking, he's got okay wrestling, he's got okay grappling. He's one of these all-round fighters that can mix it together and change game plan depending on the opponent that's in front of him. But he's also a fighter that, for as good as he can look inside the cage, he can be so vulnerable defensively. He can get hit, he can get knocked out. That's happened a couple of times. He was doing okay against Dricus du Plessis until du Plessis landed on him. He was doing okay against Carlos Prates until Prates landed on him. So I kind of feel that pattern's actually going to fall into this fight as well. I think that Gustafsson is going to do some good work too, from using his physicality, getting in the clinch, sort of shutting Trevin Giles down a little bit. I think if Gustafsson gives Trevin Giles a lot of open space, that's where Giles will do a decent job in just being, having this point scoring style, just jab, land, even though he doesn't have massive volume. But I think it's going to be one of these fights where Giles is actually going to be doing okay, and you're going to be thinking, okay, the underdog's going to pull through here, but then something's going to change in a split moment. Gustafsson will land something, he'll hurt him, knock him out, or Gustafsson will just switch and be super aggressive, super overwhelming, get a hold of him, push Giles back against the cage. If Giles has landed a bit of volume but not too much, Gustafsson could probably take that away with some control time in the clinch. But I think that Giles is going to be doing okay until the moment that he's not. And I think Gustafsson is a UFC level fighter. I think he's aggressive. I think he's got power. And I think he could land on Giles as Giles is trying to be safe and secure. I think in the switch of a moment, Gustafsson will be able to shut his lights out. And I think that's what's going to happen. So for those reasons, I'm picking Andreas Gustafsson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mederos versus Balaji. And it's a bit of an interesting fight, this, not just from a stylistic perspective, but just where both fighters are at. Like, I do want to state before I go into this that both fighters are young, and definitely young in the career, and definitely young in the UFC. They're both, have got good training around them. They're both going to develop. They're both in a developmental stage of the career as well. So they've both definitely got room for development and room for improvement. Now, by the tone of my voice, you probably think I'm just going to go on some rant about how they shouldn't be in the UFC or anything like that, and I'm not. They've both got good qualities. Like, Balaji is very physical, he's athletic, he loves the wrestling and grappling, specifically the wrestling aspect, again, using his athleticism and physical traits to take his opponents down and dominate from a physical perspective. And then Mederos, I think he's a super slick striker. He's very elusive. He's educated when it comes to the striking. He knows what to throw and at what time, doesn't overexert himself, doesn't put himself in too many bad positions, but lands really efficiently and effectively. So they've both got the good parts. Now, where Mederos has got holes and he's a bit green and a bit raw still is within the wrestling and grappling. Now, he is training at the lab with the likes of, your Benson Henderson, and they will patch those holes with the wrestling and grappling over time. Like, I don't know how long it'll take. It might already be patched. He's had a couple of camps with them now. So, definitely that aspect of Mederos he can be got at. Now, interestingly, that's what I said with Balaji in regards to where he's good. He's good with getting the takedowns and doing some good work, being a heavy blanket on top. Now, where I think Balaji can be got at is within the striking. That doesn't say he's a bad striker. He can strike, but he does tend to be overly aggressive, overexert himself, wing some big shots. And I think somebody as educated and skilled within the striking like Mederos can be able to, be super calm and composed in those heated moments where they're seeing things a little bit clearer than the opponent, and because of that, probably be able to find holes to counter, to slip out the way, to start, racking up good volume and making the opponent, Oki, in this position, just question the striking, which is then going to lead to Oki shooting takedowns, which is where Mederos, at least from the tape, can be got at. But then Mederos doesn't have a bad get-up game, so he can probably get back up to his feet and start striking with Oki again, get the upper hand against Oki, strike, and then Oki shoots a takedown. I just think it's going to be another one of these super close fights. I think Oki, from a betting perspective, is always overvalued. Like the Timmy Kwamba fight, that's actually aged quite well for Oki. Like, Kwamba, I think, has settled in the UFC and is looking like a fighter that can be very problematic to face. But what you've got to remember with that is Timmy Kwamba stepped up on a UFC debut, short notice, and up a weight class against a guy that's quite big for the weight class anyway. So again, how much stock do you put into that? And then the Chris Duncan fight, like, Oki got finished against Duncan. That you can't really take too much away from Oki with that. Like, Duncan was just a level above him and it showed. But like I say, I just feel that it's going to be one of these super close fights that could go either way. I could see a split decision written all over this if there's no finish, which I actually do think it's going to go to a decision. I can just see split decision written all over it, which in a split decision type of fight, as I always say, you want to be on the underdog. The underdog in this case is Mederos. So from a straight pick and prediction perspective, I'm picking Mederos to win this fight. And the last fight to break down, we've got Ryan Dos Santos versus Alice Ardelin. Now, I don't really have too much of an opinion on this fight, to be honest. Like, Rayan dos Santos is a fighter that's not won in the UFC. She's 0-3 if you include the Contender Series. She had the Contender Series fight. She lost. She went away. She put 3 wins together outside the UFC, 2 including an Invicta, which is, you know, a good promotion for women's MMA. So she put 3 wins together. She got into the UFC. She's had 2 fights in the UFC. She's lost both of them. And, you know, the fight that she lost in the Contender Series was Denise Gomes. You can't really take too much away from that. Denise Gomes is a savage. And then the next fight, she fought Talita Alencar. Well, Alencar's a specialist with the grappling. So again, maybe you can give Rayan dos Santos a pass there. But then Puja Tomar is a fighter that you would, again, Tomar's not an easy fighter to beat. She's quite awkward and quite aggressive. But again, like, you look at Rayan dos Santos, you know, she's like a -250 favourite or something in this fight. You would expect someone that's a -250 favourite in the UFC against an Alice Ardeline to be able to beat Puja Tomar, is what I'm basically trying to say. And then on the flip side, you've got Alice Ardeline. Now, Alice Ardeline has had 2 fights in the UFC, and she's not won either fight. So, actually looking at dos Santos' betting line, she's actually closer to -300 than she's the -240 that I've just said. So, you know, dos Santos is nearly a 3-1 favourite in a fight where there's been 5 fights under the UFC banner, 4 in the UFC, 1 Contender Series between both fighters, and all fights have been lost. Like, I don't know how you can have a -300 favourite in this type of fight. It's got split decision written all over it. It's got close striking fight written all over it. If there's takedowns, maybe more likely on the side of Ardeline, whereas with dos Santos probably try and keep it more on the feet. But if Ardeline does get a takedown, does she control dos Santos on the mat for long periods of time? Well, no, I don't think so. I think dos Santos will either defend the takedown or get back up if she is taken down, which again creates a fight won and lost striking. I think it's going to be relatively low volume. I think it's going to be back and forth. You strike, I strike, you strike, I strike. I just think it's a super, super close fight that could swing either way. And again, like, I know I always say that in these types of fights to go with the dog, but I just don't think the words can come out of my mouth that I'm picking Alice Ardeline to win this fight. I do think it's a fight that dos Santos is going to win. And the reason why I'm not siding with the underdog here, based on me saying the fight could be a close split decision, is because if the fight isn't a close split decision and one fighter is dominant, that fighter is going to be Rayan dos Santos. I don't think it's going to be Ardeline. So if I was like the other fights that I've said this with, MarQuel Mederos and Blachowicz, I don't think there's going to be a dominant winner in that fight. Like, when that's the difference. So I picked Mederos based on that being a super close potential split decision type of fight, because I don't think the fight's going to be dominant by either fighter. Whereas with Rayan dos Santos and Alice Ardeline, I'm also saying it's going to be a super close split decision type of fight, but I do think there's a chance that there is a dominant winner, and if there is, that's dos Santos. So, you know, if you're twisting my arm and forcing just a straight pick and prediction, look, -300 isn't one that I'd recommend unless you're brave and you're wanting to fill out like the long shot parlay. Then okay, if you're putting one of these fighters in a parlay, it's going to be dos Santos rather than Ardeline. But look, if you're forcing a straight pick and prediction out of me, which of course I always will on the podcast, I'm going to be picking Rayan dos Santos to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for tuning in. As I say every single week, I appreciate everybody that does listen, that does tune in, whether that be on one of our podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, or whether that's on YouTube. And also everybody that engages in the YouTube video as well, leaves a comment. You know, more often than not, it's super supportive comments, super nice comments. I love to see it. Of course, you guys that do leave the nice comments, if you're wanting, you know, any further analysis, or if you're wanting an opinion on a specific bet or parlay, you know, I'm always about to give something back to those that do support myself and do support the channel. So again, even if you don't want that, even if you want to tell me where I'm wrong, where you disagree, and where you're definitely going to prove that I'm wrong, then, you know, it's all fun and games. I love the discussion. I love the opinions. Drop a comment on the YouTube channel. And of course, if you are on the YouTube channel, if you are listening on YouTube, even if you've come from one of the podcast platforms, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's free, it doesn't cost you a penny, and it definitely helps the channel grow. And for those that don't know, that's youtube.com MMA Play 365. And one final time before we jump off, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a fun gambler, long-term gambler, just want to tail a professional handicapper. We've got a UFC prediction software on the site, inside all betting subscriptions. That's from Baze AI, and it's either $5 for one event, $10 a month, or $99 for the entire year. Super affordable, helps you make your money back as quickly as you possibly can, so you can start profiting on your bets. That's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome, thanks for listening, and I'll see you again next week.